Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier. It's telling you how hot it was, and normally in Africa I tend to find when the temperature pops 4 or 5 degrees higher, you really start to feel it. It's normally just before a storm. Last night we had a lot of rain and it's a lot crisper here in Nairobi. Macro thoughts: how central banks are using big data to help shape policy. Isaac Asimov once said, "I do not fear computers, I fear the lack of them." Authorities like Harare are tapping publicly available sources such as Google Trends and jobs websites to help nowcast their economies. And confidential data like credit registers that can help identify a stressed bank. This is going to be a big new development in the conduct of monetary policy. Bitcoin climbs as futures debut, fails to ignite attack by shorts, but settlement terms challenge short bets. Digital token up about 20-fold this year, added another 4.8% from its New York close on Friday. According to prices on Bloomberg, that was in line with its new contract for January delivery. Bitcoin touched a record 19,511 just minutes before the CME began offering futures Sunday evening. We're currently at 18,690. Impediments, however, remain to betting on a dive. The Chicago-based futures exchange, the world's biggest, required a 47% initial margin, or almost $50,000 for opening trades on a 5 Bitcoin future. Settlement terms are spurring some participants to question whether futures will move fully in line with the underlying asset. And then Nico FX tweeted Bitcoin from Bitfinex. That was yesterday. Very big variation yesterday, $1,389 range. 19,399 was the high of the day. 18,010 was the low. Let's go to some home thoughts. Shooting stars. What would you wish for right now? Geminid meteor shower over Kajiado. That's from Ray Matata. This picture, taken in 1899, shows the little tent that grew into the present-day Nairobi city of Kenyan history. Nairobi is the capital and largest city of Kenya. The name comes from the Maasai phrase Enkare Nairobi, which translates to cool water, reference to the Nairobi River which flows through the city. Nairobi, founded in 1899 by the colonial authorities of British East Africa as a rail depot of the Uganda Railway. The town quickly grew to replace Machakos as the capital of Kenya in 1907. Area was essentially uninhabited swamp until a supply depot of the Ugandan Railway was built in 1899, which soon became the railway's headquarters. The city was named after a waterhole known in Maasai as Enkare Nairobi, meaning a place of cool waters. Completely rebuilt in the early 1900s after an outbreak of plague and the burning of the original town. Location of the Nairobi railway camp was chosen due to its central position between Mombasa and Kampala. In 1905, Nairobi replaced Mombasa as the capital of the British Protectorate. My goodness, it's expanding at an enormous clip. It seems that Putney has a river too, quite pleasant actually, says London_W4, who normally takes photographs of the Chizzy. But fortunately, last weekend potted down Putney. If you look at that photograph, that's from where we used to row when I was a young boy. I lived up on the hill, and I knew Putney like the back of my hand, as I still do. A brand new day in Montecito, sunrise. This is Yan Photo. Political reflections, this became a very iconic photograph of Zimbabwe. Des jeunes femmes traversant la rue derrière blindé alors que les soldats zimbabwéens régulent la circulation à Harare, AFP. The big news, obviously, it was out of South Africa. Cyril Ramaphosa finally fulfills his political destiny, says the Financial Times. For 20 years, Cyril Ramaphosa has been the nearly man of South African politics, a protege of Nelson Mandela who wanted Mr. Ramaphosa to succeed him. He has a calculating streak within him, says Makabesi Dechana, Associate Professor of Political Science at Johannesburg University, referring to the political savvy he showed as apartheid was crumbling in the early 1990s. The National Party were in awe of his negotiating skills. He says he pushed them to concede things they never thought they would concede. Moletsi Mbeki, an academic and younger brother of Thabo Mbeki, president after Mandela, says Cyril was the person who wrote the Black Economic Empowerment Law in South Africa, which my brother then adopted when he was president. Black economic empowerment is the main driver of corruption in this country. He wrote the law that created this mayhem of corruption under the cloak of black advancement, he says. Which is an interesting perspective. I like this photograph by Siboko S. of Reuters capturing the exact moment when Cyril Ramaphosa was declared the winner of the ANC presidential race. Here again, SABC News Online said Ramaphosa is the new ANC president. My piece over the weekend was hoping for such an outcome, and I asked South Africa, will it be 1994 all over again? He's obviously seen as market friendly and has said we will wash the ANC clean. I tweeted him and said the market is backing you big. This is the signal in the noise. South African Rand ranked 4% higher ahead of the ANC leadership election results. Best day in 2 years. This is from Reuters, Jamie. Going back to the article that I wrote, I said if Ramaphosa succeeds in wresting the leadership of the ANC, South African asset prices will enter the sweetest of sweet spots. Global investors will surely buy the Rand by the bucket load, and we could see a further meaningful rally in the order of 10% towards 12 versus the dollar. Stock market, which hit a record high a few weeks ago, largely on the back of Naspa's stake in Tencent. Naspa's has a 33% stake in Tencent, which is valued at $158 billion. I said the stock exchange will soar as the banks particularly are re-rated bigly. Mr. Ramaphosa could well be the ignition for returning South Africa Inc. back to that incredible moment full of promise. I said Dlamini Zuma won't, that's the binary outcome. In my article I said President Zuma has laughed in the face of his adversaries like a political sorcerer, and shrugged off all sorts of scandal. Look at this from Nicolaus Bauer. The moment Zuma hears Ramaphosa is the new president. Having studied Paul Ekman, his face and its micro expressions give absolutely everything away. Have a look at that. President Zuma, in my opinion, was surely the progenitor of this new 21st century linguistic warfare, turning words on their head and cloaking oneself in the language of the righteous. Donald Trump is another. Take a look at this Control Risks Africa risk map for 2018. The sub-article, which is called Africa, the Next Generation, says this. The disparity between the advanced ages of many African leaders and the youthful populations over which they preside is remarkable. The average age of African heads of state is currently 65, about 10 years older than the average of current EU heads of state or US presidents on election. The demographic pressures that come from below have undoubtedly been influencing how political leaders respond to the demands of their citizens, a trend long highlighted in our risk map analysis, they say. One of Africa's longest-standing and oldest leaders, Mugabe, now swept from power in Zimbabwe, it's a timely moment to ask how political leadership is changing in response to these pressures and who will emerge. In the next generation, political transitions can be unsettling but are likely to become more common. Anticipating and preparing for how they will affect business is essential for success in 2018 and beyond. We have identified key power dynamics to watch in the coming year. Transitions don't have to be quite so messy. Our preferred option among ruling parties in dominant party systems has been to select a non-threatening consensus candidate to balance different factional interests within a broad tent. The logic goes that a consensus candidate will help the party to heal divisions that have emerged during succession tussles and preserve its dominance of the political space. With such candidates, Haile Mariam Desalegn in Ethiopia, Filipe Nyusi in Mozambique, João Lourenço in Angola, owe their selection to the party apparatus. They have often proved bolder than expected, particularly Lourenço in Angola. Haile Mariam has mustered his own political clout, significantly reshuffling his cabinet in November 2016 to increase ethnic diversity and add technocrats following months of often violent protests. As he attempts to widen his support base, power is shifting within the ruling alliance, a development fraught with stability risks. Headline change in Angola in 2017 was seismic, given that former President José Eduardo dos Santos spent 38 years in power. But change within the country's colossal power structures was expected to be slower. However, Lourenço has proven willing to challenge the Dos Santos dynasty, removing the former president's daughter as head of the national oil company. He's also pledged to tackle the monopolies that dominate sub-Saharan Africa's third largest economy, paving the way for more significant changes and reforms to the policy environment in 2018. Amid socio-economic grievances, usually business-friendly governments are steering towards nationalistic, populist policies with promises of wealth redistribution. Restrictions on trade and important goods and limited labour mobility are becoming problematic for corporates. In Tanzania, President John Magufuli has deployed interventionist policies in the extractive sector, fast-tracking 3 new controversial mining laws that allow Tanzania to cancel and renegotiate contracts and force operations to submit to a new regulatory regime. In attempting to ensure that Tanzania gets what he considers the best deal for its natural resources, Magufuli is undertaking a high-stakes gamble that risks scaring off foreign investors. They're scared off the big. I take you back to an article I wrote in 2014 about Ouagadougou, and I called it Ouagadougou's signal to sub-Saharan Africa. And I was saying that what's clear is a very young, very informed, very connected African youth demographic. Many characterize it as a demographic dividend, which for beautiful Blaise Compaoré turned into a demographic terminator. And I said that this is set to alter the existing equilibrium between the rulers and the subjects, and a rebalancing has begun. Former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper says Vladimir Putin knows how to handle an asset, and that's what he's doing with the president. In a short interview, the US issued NSS-Final document, and there's a link for that document. The American people elected me to make America great again, Donald Trump said. The United States faces an extraordinarily dangerous world filled with a wide range of threats that have intensified in recent years. When I came into office, rogue regimes were developing nuclear weapons and missiles to threaten the entire planet. Radical Islamist terror groups were flourishing. Terrorists taking control of vast swathes of the Middle East. Rival powers were aggressively undermining American interests around the globe. China and Russia challenged American power, influence, and interests, attempting to erode American security and prosperity. They are determined to make economies less free and fair, to grow their militaries and to control information and data, to repress their societies and expand their influence, the document said. Glowing auras of black money in the Pentagon's mysterious UFO program, worth a look. Cracks in the House of Saud, the pratfalls of the Crown Prince Patrick Gomer. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is the undoubted Middle East Man of the Year, but his great impact stems more from his failures than his successes. He is accused of being Machiavellian in clearing his way to the throne by the elimination of opponents inside and outside the royal family. But when it comes to Saudi Arabia's position in the world, his miscalculations remind one of less of the cunning maneuvers of Machiavelli and more of the pratfalls of Inspector Clouseau. Again and again, the impulsive and mercurial young prince has embarked on ventures abroad that achieved the exact opposite of what he intended. When his father became king in early 2015, he gave support to a rebel offensive in Syria that achieved some success, but provoked full-scale Russian military intervention, which in turn led to the victory of President Bashar al-Assad. About the same time, MBS launched Saudi armed intervention mostly through airstrikes in the civil war in Yemen. The action was codenamed Operation Decisive Storm. 2.5 years later, the war is still going on, has killed 10,000 people, and brought at least 7 million Yemenis close to starvation. The Crown Prince is focusing Saudi foreign policy on aggressive opposition to Iran and its regional allies, but the effect of his policies has been to increase Iranian influence. The feud with Qatar, in which Saudi Arabia and the UAE play the leading role, led to a blockade being imposed 5 months ago, which is still going on. The offense of the Qataris was to have given support to Al-Qaeda-type movements, an accusation that was true enough but could be levelled equally at Saudi Arabia. The net result of the anti-Qatari campaign has been to drive the small state further into the arms of Iran. It is Saudi Arabia, not its rivals, that is becoming isolated. The political balance of power in the region changed to its disadvantage over the last 2 years. A combination of Sunni states led by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey was failing to carry out regime change in Damascus. This powerful group is fragmented, with Turkey and Qatar moving closer to the Russian-backed Iranian-led axis, which is the dominant power in the northern tier of the Middle East between Afghanistan and the Mediterranean. I wrote a piece, The Capture of a 32-year-old wannabe king. Have a read. I think he's a little bit thick, to be honest. Let's move on to the currency markets. Let's take a look. Euro dollar 117.93, dollar index 93.68, Japanese yen 112.54, the pound 133.84, the Australian dollar 0.7670, India rupee 64.165, South Korean won 1087.87, Brazilian real 329.25, Egyptian pound 17.8270, South African rand 12.7573. Dollar index, many have turned bullish on this index, I'm not so sure. Euro dollar, take a look at this, I think we hit 120.60 first quarter next year. Gold, well, that's been firming up lately. Everyone had written it off. We're now at 12.64. WTI crude oil last trading at $53 and $57.39. I think that's going as high as $63.99. In part because of heightened and sharpened geopolitical risk. Botswana's President Kama leads by example, waves goodbye. Zimbabwean product is on British shelves. This is according to Vince Masewe. That's an interesting development. I like this photograph of baobab trees framing a serene view of night skies in Tarangire National Park, Tanzania, and this one of the sunset over Lake Tanganyika, destination TZ. South African all shares up 13.93% this year, but could rally sharply from here. The Rand's 5% gain since Friday, the biggest two-day move in 2 years. You remember I wrote the piece, This Man Christo Vize with a Midas Touch. I was writing about Steinhoff, talking about a forensic intellectual cul-de-sac seemingly across vast swathes of South African media. Then talking about how no one seemed to be really analysing the scenario. Bloomberg have come out with a report saying why South Africa's Steinhoff could be the next Enron. Surrounded by lawyers and advisors, he sounded exhausted when he answered a call on December the 11th. Well, I'm alive, is all he would say. People were expecting an explanation from Steinhoff. Instead, we got nothing. In the absence of any real information, you tend to assume the worst. South Africa's Steinhoff will provide further information about its finances following a meeting with bankers on Tuesday. Nigerian all-share up 41.24% so far this year. Ghana Stock Exchange up 50.51% year to date. Interesting piece from Africa to your loved one. Ethiopia targets US rose market. Ethiopia has become a major force in global floriculture in the past 2 decades, exploiting a tropical high-altitude climate that provides year-round natural light combined with hot days and cold nights, perfect for bringing plants into bloom. The conditions mirror those found in the Andes, where growers in Ecuador and Colombia currently dominate flower exports to the US. 10 or 15 years ago, Ethiopia was not exporting a single rose, but now we have earned our position in the world market. North America has been the major importer of horticultural products from other parts of the world, so we want to have a part of that. Ethiopian flower exports are currently focused on Europe and have made the country Africa's second biggest producer after Kenya, and 4th equal worldwide, according to Rabobank research based on 2015 figures. Interesting, when the state moves, which is very state-led, they move with conviction. Attorney General Githu Muigai says Raila Odinga's oath plan is a death wish, that he faces the death penalty should he be sworn in as a people's president, and at the same time chided top lawyers in the opposition for misleading the former prime minister to take an illegal oath. Professor Githu disagreed with Mr. Orengo. Whenever I see Mr. Orengo, I expect him to say, to the ramparts. He's become a very hardline figure. Saying some senator says there is nothing like treason law, that is colonial law. This is a man sitting in the Senate, he asks. It's a politically ridiculous idea which speaks to the ridiculousness of the opposition. Kenya shilling 103.135. Dume Singh, who tweeted me from Lamu, says pressure's piling up on the shilling. And I said, look, there's a massive undercount of remittances. And also Henry Rotich will surely slot the Eurobond market for $2 billion. And therefore we've seen the can being kicked down the road. Kenya's 6 7/8 June 24 Eurobond is trading at a yield of 5.58%. Total return year to date is 19.2%, and over 12 months the total return is 20.7%. Look at the yield, 5.58%, considerably lower than the rollover of the syndicated loan, and hence why I believe $2 billion is a shoe-in. Nairobi all share up 27.94% this year, NSE-20 up 15.83% so far this year. Once again, thank you for stopping by. I do appreciate it.